The Lil Miss Murder, How a Car Plate Became a Clue. The Girl in the Black Honda. Before you dive into this chilling case, don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might just be happening in your town right now. The night of March 25, 1988, was like any other on the quiet highways of Wyoming. The wind howled across the open plains, rattling street signs and whistling through the gaps of the long, lonely road. A black 1988 Honda CRX sped down the dark highway, its license plate glowing in the headlights behind it, Lil Miss. Inside was Lisa Marie Kimmel, 18 years old, bright-eyed, ambitious, and driving from Denver to Billings to visit her boyfriend. She was young, fearless, and proud of the personalized plate her family had given her, a nickname from childhood. But somewhere between the small towns of Casper and Cody, she vanished. The last anyone saw of her was at a rest stop where she bought gas and smiled at the cashier, telling him she had a long drive ahead. Witnesses said she was followed by a dark pickup truck, one no one could quite describe. Hours later, her parents realized something was wrong when she didn't arrive in Billings. The next morning they called the police. But in 1988 there was no GPS, no cell phones, just hope and long-distance calls that led nowhere. Weeks passed. Flyers went up, search parties scoured the roadside, and local radio stations repeated the same desperate plea. If you see a black Honda CRX with the license plate Lil Miss, please call authorities. Then came the discovery that turned the quiet Wyoming countryside into a nightmare. A fisherman found a body floating in the North Platte River, a young woman bound and beaten. Dental records confirmed the worst. It was Lisa. The news sent shockwaves through her small Montana hometown. The Lil Miss plate that had once been a symbol of her joy became a haunting headline across the nation. Who could have done something so brutal, and why? The police had no weapon, no witnesses, no fingerprints, only the chilling absence of Lisa's car. Her Honda and its unmistakable plate were gone. Months turned to years, and the case grew colder than the Wyoming wind. Detectives changed, evidence boxes gathered dust, and Lisa's family held on to a single question that echoed louder with every passing year. Where was the car? Then, in the mid-1990s, strange tips began to trickle in. A local mechanic remembered seeing a black Honda buried under snow behind an old property. Someone else swore they saw a rusted car with a vanity plate in a man's garage up north. But the leads never went anywhere. Until 2002, when a construction crew digging near a remote property unearthed something that made the sheriff's office drop everything. It wasn't bones this time. It was metal. Faded paint. A bumper. And there it was, the plate half buried in the dirt, coated in decades of mud and decay. Lil Miss. A chill swept through the investigators who stood around the pit. The case they had all but forgotten had just come back to life. The property belonged to Dale Wayne Eaton, a reclusive mechanic known to neighbors as quiet but odd. He had no criminal record worth mentioning, but he had one thing the police couldn't ignore: a deep pit on his land that no one was allowed near. When authorities started to dig, what they uncovered beneath the cold Wyoming soil was more than anyone expected. Because what lay buried with that car wasn't just a clue. It was a secret that would blow open a 14-year-old mystery and reveal the face of a killer hiding in plain sight. The man behind the plate. The news of the Lil Miss car discovery spread like wildfire. Detectives who had long retired came back to the precinct just to see the photos. The black Honda CRX, dented, rusted, buried under gravel and clay, had finally resurfaced after 14 years. And with it, the question everyone had asked since 1988 returned, louder than ever. Who buried Lisa's car and why? The property belonged to Dale Wayne Eaton, a name that meant little to most people in Wyoming. To neighbors, he was just the quiet mechanic who lived off the grid miles from the nearest town. He fixed engines, hunted deer, and kept to himself. But behind that calm, rugged exterior was a man who had perfected the art of being invisible. Investigators obtained a search warrant. What they found on Eaton's land was a bizarre collage of junk, broken appliances, old cars, rusted metal parts, the kind of chaos that could easily hide something sinister. But what drew their attention most was the pit. It was deep, dug into hard Wyoming soil, covered with sheet metal and gravel. The same spot where the Honda was discovered. Inside the house they found strange items: women's jewelry, old rope, and a faded Polaroid of a young woman, smiling, unaware, who looked eerily similar to Lisa. Detective Jim Carr, who had been a rookie during the original investigation, stared at the evidence table in silence. "We missed this for 14 years, he said, voice low. And he was right here all along." Still, a car wasn't enough to convict anyone. Eaton denied everything. He claimed the vehicle had been dumped on his land without his knowledge. There were no fingerprints, no witnesses, and no direct physical evidence tying him to Lisa's murder. Until they tested his DNA. In 2002, DNA technology had advanced far beyond what it was in the 1980s. Forensic scientists revisited the evidence preserved from Lisa's case, the clothing found with her body, the rope, and the hair samples. They ran it through CODIS, the FBI's national DNA database. The result hit like a lightning strike. A match. The DNA belonged to Dale Wayne Eaton. It wasn't just a trace. It was conclusive, found on multiple pieces of evidence. Eaton had not only kidnapped Lisa, but had held her captive for days before brutally killing her and dumping her body into the North Platte River. The discovery shattered the illusion of the quiet mechanic. Suddenly, stories from neighbors painted a different picture. One woman recalled seeing Lisa's distinctive Honda near Eaton's property in 1988 but thought little of it at the time. Another remembered hearing screams one summer night but assumed it was just a coyote. As the investigation deepened, detectives discovered Eaton had a long history of violence, assaults, thefts, and unreported disappearances of young women in nearby areas. He'd been arrested once in the early 1990s for a kidnapping attempt, but the victim escaped, and the case fell apart due to lack of evidence. This time there would be no escape. Eaton was arrested in March 2003. The moment officers handcuffed him, he showed no emotion, no resistance, no words. Just silence. But the more the FBI dug, the darker his story became. They found journal notes and sketches that hinted at fantasies of control, fear, and revenge. He saw Lisa not as a person but as a target, someone to dominate, break, and erase. In one chilling note scrawled on yellow paper, he had written, "Nobody remembers after 7 years." He was wrong. The evidence spoke louder than any confession ever could. But the case wasn't over yet, because when prosecutors prepared for trial, a disturbing rumor began to spread. Eaton might not have acted alone. There were whispers of another person, someone who had seen Lisa alive in captivity, someone who had helped cover up the car. But when investigators tracked that lead, what they found was even more twisted than a second accomplice. Hidden inside Eaton's basement was a wall, solid concrete, recently patched. And when the team broke it open, they found something inside that froze everyone in place. Something that made the Lil Miss case spiral from a murder into a nightmare. The Wall of Secrets. When investigators broke through the patched concrete wall in Dale Eaton's basement, they expected maybe stolen goods, maybe hunting trophies, not what they found. Behind the slab was a small, makeshift room. It was dark, musty, and silent except for the sound of boots crunching over debris. The air smelled of oil, dust, and something older, something that didn't belong. The light from a detective's flashlight swept across the space, and then it stopped. On one wall, crudely nailed wooden boards held up dozens of newspaper clippings. Articles about missing women, police sketches, and in the center, a yellowed news piece about Lisa Marie Kimmel. Beneath it, taped neatly, was a photo of her black Honda with the license plate Lil Miss. For a moment, no one spoke. Detective Carr muttered, "He kept her story, like a trophy." On a nearby table lay personal items. A woman's watch, a lock of blonde hair tied with ribbon, and a Polaroid camera. The film rolls were old, degraded, but some contained blurred images that still made sense. Women, bound, terrified, photographed in dim light. There was no mistaking it. Eaton had not just killed Lisa. He had collected her memory. The FBI brought in psychological profilers who studied his behavior, and what they uncovered painted a portrait of a man consumed by power. Eaton's isolation had warped into obsession. Each clipping, each photo, each item was a token of control, a way to relive the terror he inflicted. But the real question remained, was Lisa his only victim? For months, investigators combed through the clippings and compared them to missing person cases across the country. Many of the women shared similar traits: young, petite, brown hair, traveling alone. Some were last seen near highways, truck stops, or remote Wyoming roads. Still, no hard evidence linked Eaton to anyone else. But his basement wall suggested otherwise. As prosecutors built their case, Eaton remained mostly silent in custody. He refused interviews, ignored questions, and spent his days staring at the concrete cell walls, perhaps the only place quieter than his basement had ever been. That changed one night when a prison psychologist pressed him about Lisa. She asked, "Why did you keep her car?" Eaton stared at the floor and whispered, "Because she was perfect." It was the closest thing to a confession he ever gave. By 2004, the prosecution had enough evidence for a capital murder trial. The courtroom was filled with tension, Lisa's family on one side, Eaton's defense on the other. The black Honda CRX, now restored from its burial, was brought into court as evidence. The license plate, Lil Miss, gleamed under the lights. The jurors didn't take long. Eaton was found guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and aggravated assault. He was sentenced to death. But justice, even when delivered, doesn't always bring peace. Lisa's mother, Sheila, spoke outside the courthouse, tears in her eyes. "We waited 14 years to know the truth. Now we have it. But knowing doesn't make the pain go away." Years later, investigators revisited Eaton's property once more. They searched for other buried cars, bones, or hidden evidence. They found nothing. Still, locals in that quiet Wyoming county said the land felt cursed, a place where silence carried memories. And for many, the scariest part wasn't that Eaton was caught. It was that he lived among them for over a decade, eating in the same diners, shopping in the same stores, fixing their cars, while a young woman's body lay forgotten in the river, and her car was buried under his feet. But even after his conviction, one question haunted everyone who worked the case. If Eaton was bold enough to keep trophies, hide photos, and bury cars, how many others had stories like Lisa's that never surfaced? One retired detective summed it up in an interview years later. "We caught him because of one thing, that plate. That silly, innocent vanity plate. If not for Lil Miss, she'd still be missing." The name became infamous, a haunting echo of a young woman's life cut short, but not forgotten. Because even in death, Lisa Marie Kimmel spoke, not through her voice, but through a simple license plate that refused to stay buried. But just when the world began to move on, the FBI lab received something unexpected from the evidence room, a degraded roll of undeveloped film taken from Eaton's basement. When they processed it, what appeared on the negatives was enough to make even the most seasoned agents stop cold. A photo of another young woman. Unknown. Unidentified. And next to her, written in the corner of the frame in shaky handwriting, two haunting words. "Next Mississippi." The next miss. When the FBI lab developed the final roll of film from Dale Eaton's basement, everyone expected more of the same. Evidence already accounted for, grim remnants of a case finally closed. But the photos that emerged under the red glow of the darkroom light made every agent's stomach twist. The images were old, worn, and partially degraded, but they told a story no one had ever seen before. One photo showed a woman in her early 20s sitting in the backseat of a car, terrified, her wrists bound, her eyes pleading with whoever stood behind the lens. Another photo showed her standing near a dirt road, the same Wyoming plains stretching endlessly behind her. And scrawled in faint handwriting on the border of the film, barely legible but unmistakable, were the words, "Next Mississippi." The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation team. The Lil Miss case wasn't over. It might never have been just one victim. Agents began working around the clock, cross-referencing the woman's face with missing persons reports from the 1980s and 1990s. Facial recognition systems, age progression modeling, even AI reconstructions. All of it pointed toward one possibility: she was never reported missing. Whoever she was, Eaton had taken her, documented her terror, and erased her from existence. The chilling thought hung over every meeting, every file, every late-night conversation in the FBI office. How many more misses were there? Detective Carr, now gray-haired and weathered, returned to help the team. He'd spent decades haunted by Lisa's eyes from her photos, and now, seeing this new face, he felt the same cold pull of dread. He stood in front of the evidence board, staring at the two side-by-side photos, Lil Miss and Next Miss. "This man didn't stop," he said quietly. "He escalated. He got better at hiding." Eaton refused to cooperate. From his death row cell, he sat motionless as agents showed him the photo. He smirked, then looked away. "Some things," he said, "are better left under the dirt." But investigators refused to let the mystery die with him. They returned to his property with new technology, ground-penetrating radar, advanced soil analysis, cadaver dogs. The land had changed over the years, but the evil underneath it hadn't. For 3 days they dug through fields, sheds, and foundations. Then, on the 4th day, one of the dogs alerted near an old drainage ditch, half covered by weeds and metal scraps. The team began to dig. First they found a small bracelet. Then a set of keys. Then something worse, human remains. It wasn't Lisa. DNA confirmed it was another woman, identity still unknown. But there it was, proof that Eaton had done it again. The discovery reopened the case to national attention. News stations called it the Lil Miss Murders. Documentaries aired. True crime shows dissected every clue, every hidden message. And through it all, one truth emerged that no one could ignore. Lisa Marie Kimmel's personalized plate had done more than solve her own case. It had exposed a serial predator who might have stayed hidden forever. Years later, Eaton died on death row, never naming his other victims, never confessing to how many there were. His final statement was short, bitter, and cryptic. "You found what you were meant to find." The FBI never stopped looking. Even today, files labeled "Next Miss" remain open in Wyoming's Unsolved Cases database. Each year, a handful of new leads come in: a missing girl's family recognizing a bracelet, a local remembering something odd about a neighbor in 1989, a photo found in an old camera. Some agents believe there are at least 3 more victims. Others think Eaton was bluffing, that Next Miss was just his final manipulation. But those who've walked the cold plains where Lisa vanished don't see it that way. They believe the soil still hides more secrets, that beneath the quiet Wyoming horizon lie stories untold, waiting for someone to find them. And every time a new missing persons case hits the local news, the same haunting image flashes through the minds of those who remember: the glossy black car, the plate that read "Lil Miss," and the faint handwriting on that last photograph, a warning from the grave. Next Mississippi. So when you see a car disappear down a lonely stretch of highway, headlights fading into the night, remember this: monsters don't always live in cities. Sometimes they live in silence, in plain sight, buried under years of dust and denial. And sometimes, all it takes to find them is a name on a plate that refuses to fade. If you thought this story was chilling, the next one will keep you awake. Subscribe, because the truth always has another chapter.